Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of the Security Repo Podcast. Glad to have you tuning in and learning all about security with us. Thanks for those likes, subscribes, and shares with your friends. This week, we have an awesome guest that I met over at OWASP AppSec Days, France. François Proulx is a VP of Security Research at BoostSecurity, where he leads the supply chain research team. He's got over 10 years experience in building AppSec programs for companies of all sizes, from Intel down to your mom and pop startups. And he has been in the heat of the action as the DevSec movement has taken shape. François is one of the founders of NorthSec and was a challenge designer for the NorthSec CTF. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, before we get too far into it, how was your OWASP AppSec days? How did you enjoy that event?
It was awesome. Actually, I spent a little more time across the pond, as we say, right? I was actually speaking in Munich a couple of days before that. I was invited as a guest, the speakers were invited to the opening of Oktoberfest in Munich, and then took the train to Paris. But it was awesome, to see old friends and new friends in Paris, because I actually started my career in France after graduating here in Montreal, Canada. But yeah, it was awesome.
So back at OWASP AppSec Day, you gave an awesome talk on supply chain security, and with some tooling you made, revealed some pretty disturbing facts that we'll get into a little bit later in the show. But before we get there, I'm always curious on people's journey. Like, how did you get into security in the first place?
Yeah, I started very early, actually, as far as I can remember touching a computer. I think I always tell the people that I learned to write code, to program, before learning how to use a mouse. So, late 80s, with just like those computers that had you boot them up and they were right into a basic programming language prompt. That was kind of basically taking those little magazines with basic code to write games and things like that. And soon enough, I know with friends, we're talking about security aspects, kind of social engineering and whatnot, and we're not even using those terms. Like the social engineering, for instance, was not the. But I remember, for instance, like quick anecdote, like when I learned to write code, back those computers, like you started them, and you had just the basic prompt, started to type code right away. And if you made a loop, like a while loop, you could basically do a denial of service of the computer. You had to physically restart it. So it was kind of a little prank that we're doing with those games sometimes. But soon enough, I got into all sorts of security things and went to university to study software engineering, all along doing capture the flag competitions and whatnot. And started my career just as a regular software engineer, for working for fairly large corporations like telcos in France, namely, and then Canada. But all along, I had this passion that I kept going back, and then I found this startup that was my first full-time job in security. And soon enough, a couple of months later, we were acquired by Intel, and then I was given a lot of a lot of tasks, and I had to learn very quickly, and that was awesome. So that's been my journey.
So how did you get involved in supply chain security? Like, what was the first time you saw, like, this is something that we need to deal with?
I would say, back in those days when I was working at Intel, it was right around the time where NPM got started. So I remember the days when we were writing JavaScript code for web apps with jQuery, kind of those days. And even before that, writing JavaScript directly. jQuery was awesome and whatnot at some point in time. But then NPM came along, and I saw the developers that I was overseeing, like I was in charge of application security in a big department. And they started to pull in all sorts of dependencies. And soon enough, I realized that NPM had so many tiny dependencies, like, literally, like the old joke was that there was like a one-liner library to add two numbers, like kind of ridiculous. And that kind of like, when I saw that, I said, okay, so that means that that's one component, that's another component, that's another component. So like in terms of attack surface, very quickly I realized, like, okay, so any one of those could be compromised, could have bugs, could like, and they come from all sorts of sources that are not quite clear. In terms of tracking, even for licensing at Intel, it was a big thing. I had to track every single open source components for the legal, like, compliance aspect. So it was very obvious to me, like, very quickly. And then a couple of years later, all those like malware, like stories of NPM having like malware, came along, like PyPy and whatnot. And yeah, that's like, I joined BoostSecurity at the very beginning in 2020. And that was around the time that there was probably the first big news story with the title like software supply chain compromise and things like that, was SolarWinds, right? Like in 2020, very big hack, nation state kind of level compromise of commercial package, in that case, not open source. But soon after, like, there were copycats, like, of like different sizes and complexity. And then clearly the open source ecosystem was being attacked. And in the past, even like 2 months, we saw that it's getting crazy. So that's how I kind of started to be interested in that. And as we grew, like, we developed our core product, we saw that we could become very like, basically push the industry in terms of like the supply chain security aspect. So we started this like small research team inside the company, and gradually like started to doing talks at conferences, talk about that topic. And we came up with some open source tools, and yeah, that's kind of the evolution gradually. And now we have actually like large customers paying for that service that we can discuss. But yeah, it's like, it's been a very interesting journey, because like, if we go back 2 years and a half ago, we're talking about that more like a theoretical problem. But now, like, I have people like, just I go to conferences and they're like, oh my god, like, I spent the past week cleaning up after this Shia-Lude worm and whatnot. So it's getting real.
Yeah, I was gonna actually. That was my next question for you. Is what have you seen change out there? What is it? Just the same old types of attack with like a novel twist on it, or are we seeing new things out in the market, new attacks?
um, well, I would say, I don't have any numbers, but I think clearly a large portion is like social engineering, like phishing, basically like stealing credentials from those open source maintainers. So that's, I would say, the bulk of it. So pretty standard, run of the mill, like threat actors doing that. Nothing so specific to this type of like the supply chain versus like getting compromised, like tokens or like passwords for other systems. It's just that the impact is potentially much broader. Like the blast radius of compromising a single tiny dependency that's very popular is just the there's a force multiplying effect, right? Like if you just get like the password to access like one Google Cloud account for one company, yeah, you're gonna breach that company. Maybe they have something interesting, but if you compromise a very popular open source library, suddenly everybody updates, and then you potentially have initial access into millions of new places, which gets really scary quickly.
I, I just heard an interesting fact. I was just at a conference, a company called Scarf. They basically sit underneath all of the package managers, like they're like a CDN layer for them, and they collect stats. It said 80% of all package downloads they see are for latest. So that just scared me when I heard that, because I honestly thought we were not doing that anymore. I thought people had stopped doing that. But no, apparently no. But on the other end, if you do pin to a specific package, you never download another version ever again. That is just your go-to, no matter what happens with it, which is also scary, because what are we doing? This is
Yeah.
hard stuff, though. The dependency management is just classically hard, and now we have all these threats that are just feel like it's speeding up recently. I don't know if it's just me paying closer attention to it, or we are just seeing more stuff. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Are we just seeing more now? Because, well, I'll just flat out say it. Is AI helping attackers figure out how to do this faster in real time?
That's a good question. Well, yeah, there's a definite increase. Like in the niche of supply chain security, software supply chain security that we took upon is really this kind of build pipeline aspect of the open source the supply chain. And we've seen in over the past year like a big increase in the amount of attacks targeting specifically the build pipeline, and that, to go back to your previous question where you're like, oh, what's like, how does it, is it changing, what type of attacks? I mentioned that there's a lot of like social engineering, phishing and whatnot, but the other angle that we've been focusing on is really like attacking straight on with no human involved, like no social engineering, just straight compromising, finding a vulnerability to get right into the heart of where the package is being compiled, tested, and then packaged and shipped to like a package registry. That's kind of our specialty in the research. And that we've seen a big increase in the past, I would say, basically since the beginning of the year. Like in December 2024, that's when it started. Like before that, it was almost more theoretical. We were talking about that like at conferences, saying like, look, this is dangerous, like be careful. Like we were doing a responsible disclosure to big and small projects. But in December, that's when we started to see like real attacks. And then like you may remember in March, like TJ Actions was a big one, and then like this whole cascade of attacks since mid-August. Many of them have leveraged the techniques that we've been doing research and talking about. So namely, just like it's been a combination of everything, like compromising one credential by phishing, and then like poisoning the build pipeline to attack other libraries, and this kind of worm has been spreading partially through that. So it's, yeah, it's definitely increasing, and the complexity, the level of tradecraft from the threat actors is improving, unfortunately.
The one thing that I keep coming back to, because people ask me questions when I'm traveling to other events, people that don't work in security full time keep asking me like, what do I do to be safe from this? So I do want to talk about Poutine. I do want to dig into what the research has done, but I think for people listening now are like might be a little scared. Maybe we can inject some sanity here. What do people do to keep themselves safe from your point of view?
Well, you mentioned it before, like a lock file, like to pin a given known good version. Let's say, you develop your software, you pick a version, you pin it, like you make sure you have a lock file that guarantees like it's not gonna change under your feet. Like if you just like run, like especially if you move it from one machine, like works on my machine, and then you push it or to like GitHub or whatever, to the pull request, your colleagues look at it, it runs in the CI. You want what runs on your machine to run exactly the same in the CI and then in some colleagues' machine. So in order to do that with dependencies, you must cryptographically guarantee that it's the exact same version, and that's using like lock files and pinning and whatnot. So with that, now you have at least okay, stability, and if there are those attacks, it will prevent at least automatically getting the new malware. maybe you pinned a version that had malware in the first place. Unfortunately, it could happen, but that's much more unlikely, because if you kind of run tests and you don't see any kind of big spike in CPU, because a lot of times it's going to be those crypto miners, so there will be some signs that it's just like using a lot of resources, for instance. Because only recently we started to see more like an info stealer type of malware. So that's much more like grab and go, like just steal the credentials and then like it goes away. So it's not gonna be wasting a lot of resources. But yeah, I would say like start with pinning your dependencies so that you know which version you're running. uh, Kind of let it like bake in the CI and make sure there's nothing like weird happening after you run the test for a couple hours or whatever. Deploy in a staging environment before you deploy to production. So if something sketchy happens, it's not going to reach production right away. So there's like, staging before that.
I would just follow on for that for anybody listening. It's time to move to short-lived credentials. If someone steals, can dump a credential from your CI pipeline, but it expires like at the end of the day, that shortens the window of attack. Like that was the Singularity, the NX Singularity attack. Like that was a month they had that key. That why are they still using the same key after a month? Well, that's the way we've been doing it. But I keep pushing that out there because that's kind of at the end of the day, that's what these attacks are after. That's or how they're predicated. They're not doing some kind of crazy backflip through 0 days through memory injection. It's, hey, dump the credential so we can just walk in and do what we want and push our own code. So fascinating how it's all tied together. These are OWASP top 10 basics from years ago. And well, we're still seeing the outcome of attackers still winning. But one of the reasons I brought you on the show is you have built an awesome tool, open source, that you have released called Poutine. Could you give us a quick high level, what is Poutine? And then we'll dig into a little bit of some of your findings.
Yeah. So Poutine, it's an open source command line tool. You can find it on GitHub. You can just Google GitHub Poutine. And you just install it. You can install it. It's a cross-platform, very lightweight. And it's been designed, I don't know if you know SemGrep, right? It's like another open source scanner for finding vulnerabilities. I designed Poutine to be a bit like SemGrep, like that's very, very lightweight, very easy, very developer friendly. It doesn't like require like large resources like other scanners that may like take multiple gigabytes and like multiple minutes to even start. And it's really specialized, designed for scanning the build pipeline of open source packages. It doesn't have to be open source, but like the build pipeline is going to find vulnerabilities in those build pipelines that would allow an attacker to basically run arbitrary code, and most likely with the objective to steal the credentials, as you mentioned, and then pivot to something else, right? So basically, Poutine has built-in rules. You can take them, modify them. It's kind of again, very similar to SemGrep. It has its own domain-specific language to write rules. It's relatively easy to understand how to customize those rules. And I think it comes with maybe about 10 rules out of the box. It supports scanning build pipelines in GitHub, GitLab, OpenShift pipeline as code, and maybe another one I forget. But so very easy to use. You can point it, like you just give it a read-only credential to say GitHub, and you point it to either a repo or an organization. And even an organization that contains, say, hundreds of repos and dozens of pipelines for each, so like thousands, is going to take just a few minutes at most to scan all that and give results. So someone could start to do the same kind of research that we do and do responsible disclosure, or unfortunately attackers could do the same. So it's But that's why we keep doing. That's like, we scan at scale. So we built this open source thing so that in our backend we have infrastructure to run it at scale, to scan millions of open source packages, and we have our own custom rules like that are improved. They're not in the open source version. It's more precise, like lower false positives, and finding some other more like advanced scenarios. Yeah, but yet clearly the attackers have caught on, and I have the evidence that even the threat actors use Poutine. So
It's always the risk when you're building a security tool is, can this be leveraged by the attacker? If it can be leveraged by the blue team, it definitely can be leveraged by the red team. Maybe the use case isn't exactly the same, but at the end of the day, the tech gets you there. So you use this at scale. You're one of the other companies in the world ingesting the GitHub public feed, which I think is fascinating because I talk about this feed a lot because Git Guardian's built on it where I work, or that was our initial product was built on the concepts. So it's rare to run into someone in the wild that, hey, we're doing that too, but we're finding different stuff. So maybe you could just give us a quick high level on what are the surprising things you have found out there in the realm of open source on GitHub with regard to supply chain security.
yeah, so definitely, yeah, we're doing something like our input source is just basically the fire hose of events on the public events on GitHub. Um, so yeah, we just see a lot of junk like repos. It's just insane. Sometimes I think the craziest thing that I didn't expect to see before I saw it, some people used it as a database for blockchain projects. Like, I'm sorry to say, but like pretty shitty blockchain projects. But I saw something. They were pushing to a repo literally like once a second with kind of cryptographic like blocks, and then pulling. So basically using GitHub as a free bandwidth, just a CDN, like where you can push and pull and you don't pay for either for the storage or for the bandwidth. Yeah. And so we ingest that at scale, and we correlate it with the vulnerabilities that we can find in the build pipelines, and that allows us to actually find the evidence of some of, not necessarily the most advanced, because it's quite complex sometimes, like the more advanced techniques, but some of the simpler attack patterns, we can spot them like in near real time. And that allowed us in some cases to basically report to the maintainers of a project, like as the attack was like in progress effectively. um, but other than that, yeah, the sheer scale of what's happening on GitHub, it's crazy. Like the number of new users being created, like clearly bots just like generating new accounts, new repos, and like pushing stuff and then deleting it. There's a lot of noise.
Yes, there is a lot of wild stuff going on GitHub. Thanks for your work in trying to make sure we're staying safe out there and for building tools to help people to stay safe. Let's move on to our formulaic part of the show where we ask the same questions of all of our guests. We call it the Get to Know You segment. So we'll start with, and you might be biased on this, but what's your favorite all-time security command line tool?
I mentioned it before. I'm not gonna you say my tool, but I mentioned it, like SemGrep. So I've been, all my career in security has always been on the application security side of the house, like secure coding and like OWASP top 10 and all that. So SemGrep, I mean, I started to use all those static analysis tools like way back when, but when SemGrep came along, I found this was so developer friendly. It's very lightweight. You can customize the rules. So that's what I love, and I kind of copied the idea with Poutine.
So you've been hiring manager in your
Yeah.
life. Do you have a go-to favorite question you asked during an interview process?
The type of interviews that I do, I like them to be quite open ended. I like to see the candidate reason. I like to hear them reason through a complex problem. So I often just give them, I describe a system, and I say, like, just literally, like, explain to me how it works end to end, like how the data flows from one software component to another over the network and all that, just to really feel the level of depth that the candidate has in terms of software architecture, like networking and all that, because it's so important in security to to be like a jack of all trade. Like you need to know a little bit of everything, not super deep, but enough to understand how the attacker can basically influence so many pieces, and like you find the weakest link, right?
Having that systems level thinking is so important, not just in security, but kind of in life.
Mhm.
That's a great question. All right, best advice, worst advice. We'll start with the best advice, and then we'll ask you for the worst advice. What's the best advice you're hearing out there or you've ever heard in the world of security?
Best advice. Well, it really depends. Like security, like if we go back to application security, I think doing threat modeling is my kind of go-to thing. Like it goes back to the previous question too, is like having a big picture view of what you're building and like thinking of the different threats. But other than that, like for like regular users, like using passkeys, like UTF, like basically those tokens that are not using passwords. It's like passwordless authentication is a big thing that I push people to use.
Yeah, passkeys should be the standard at this point, in my opinion. Are they perfect? No, but wow, they get us so much farther than anything else we've tried. So, worst security advice. What's the worst single piece of security advice anybody ever gave you?
Well, I think it's the other side of the thing. Like it's like changing your passwords every 90 days or every 30 days or whatever. That's like when I work at big companies, it was forced up like as a policy. I just hate that. Like people then find tricks to append like a exclamation mark and whatnot, and they do the cycle. This is stupid. Like you should have like use a password manager, very long, impossible to remember credential. So there's no way, if it gets stolen, no one's gonna just guess it, shoulder serve. You're gonna need to have some malware basically like that steals it somehow, or some kind of phishing there where you copy pasted it. But yeah, so like all those like password rotation stuff is, it's just 1990s security.
There was a time where NIST said that was the right way to do it, but wow, we have learned our lesson. Longer is better, and if you never have to rotate it because it's so long and complex, even better. All right, we are here at the end of the show, and we always like to give our guests the last word. So, anything else you want to tell our audience? Anything else you want to explain or promote? Floor is yours.
Yeah, so you can find a number of the conference talks I gave over the past years on YouTube. So if you're interested in what we've been doing research, we have a blog articles on the different research topics. In fact, we should have a new article published very soon. So basically, yeah, on YouTube you can find Google my name, François Proulx. So the last talk I gave this year is called "Living Off the Pipeline." So it's all about this, basically ingesting the public firehose of events on GitHub and correlating it with those 0 days in build pipeline of open source packages. So it's a pretty exciting topic in my mind.
Thanks so much for being here. Definitely, everybody go check out that talk. All your talks, really, but that one kind of blew my mind, living off the pipeline. But thanks for listening, everybody. And thanks so much for being here, Francois. And thanks for keeping us a little bit safer out there in the world of supply chain security. Have a good one.
Thank you.